All right, hello everybody, thanks for coming. My name is Brittany. I'm the assistant manager here at Bannack, and I'm here to present Otis Anderson. He's going to tell you the story of Brother Van.
Oh, good afternoon, brothers and sisters. I want to tell you, when I first came to Bannack 22 years ago, I stepped right in here into Bannack, and I fell in love with the place immediately. And I think that anybody that ever comes to Bannack, there's always, they always find one of those buildings that speaks to them and says, this is Bannack. And this is why I'm going to come back year after year after year, because this building means something to me. It speaks to me about Bannack, about Western heritage, and so on. And usually, there's one of at least 3 buildings that people always talk about when they talk about Bannack. And the first is, of course, the courthouse down here, the Mead Hotel. The second is the school. And generally speaking, the third is the church. And I fell in love with this church the minute I saw it. It just spoke to me. There was something very, very special about it. It spoke to me about Bannack and what Bannack was all about, the spiritual side of Bannack. And so consequently, I fell in love with the church almost immediately. And after looking at the history of this church, there was one name that just spoke to me immediately, and that was Brother Van. Now, Brother Van was a traveling circuit riding preacher, well known throughout the state of Montana in the 1870s to the turn of the century. Spent over 50 years here in Montana Territory, in the state of Montana, preaching the Word of God to people and building churches, establishing a community of God wherever he went. There was something about his life and his mission in life that spoke to me, and between the church and there, I've developed my love for Brother Van, for this church, for Bannack, and that's what I'm going to be talking to you about today. About this church, about Brother Van, and what it meant to be a circuit riding preacher in the territory of Montana. So, since I'm in a church, get rid of that hat. Immediately. William Wesley Van Arsdale. He was born in Pennsylvania, near Gettysburg. He was born there March 20th, 1848. His father was Pennsylvania Dutch. His mother was of English ancestry. And by the time he was 10 years old, he had lost his father. By the time he was 12, his mother passed away. And a maiden aunt took him in. And on her farm, just about a few miles from where he saw life, Hunterstown, Pennsylvania. It was at Hunterstown, Pennsylvania then, which was near Gettysburg, that he grew up. His life was very what shall we say? It was typical of the day. He was used to hard work, working on the farm. It was a pious life because his father had been a lay minister and was a known deacon within the Methodist Church at the time. His aunt was very religious also. And so he was raised in a Christian home. And by the time that he was 13 years old, suddenly we were in the midst of the Civil War. And during the Civil War, he was in town and was a part of the Battle of Gettysburg. And during this time, he had a strong conversion experience. He said in later life that he had a conversion that really stuck. And it did. The Battle of Gettysburg really changed his life and put him on a different path in life. Because during the Battle of Gettysburg, He roamed the countryside while the troops were there and moving around and trying to find positions to battle from. And he and another childhood friend were going all around and experiencing everything that they could. They were excited about the whole thing. And as a result, they got themselves in a little bit of trouble because one of the Confederate scouts came along and thought maybe that they were spying for the Union forces and captured them and tried to pump them for information on the locations of the troops and so on. Well, they put off most of these questions and revealed almost no information about the troop movements or locations of any of the artillery and so on. And in exasperation, they finally let go. But during the Pickett's charge on the third day of the battle there, he experienced something that really moved him, because he was carrying water to wounded on both sides continually most of the day of the battle. And you can imagine the carnage and everything that was existing at that time during the battle. And at one of these water runs, he came across a soldier who was laying underneath a tree there, and he was dying. And he gave him water, and somehow or another it had a profound effect upon him in his future life, because it was there that he began to realize that there was something missing in his life. And he attended a congregational church soon after the battle, and things began to settle down, and life became a little more normal. And he attended this congregational church, and like the founder of Methodism, John Wesley, his heart was suddenly warmed, and he had a conversion experience there, as I've already mentioned, was strong enough that it stayed with him for the rest of his life. By the time he was 16, he was beginning to feel the call, and he would work with his brother Fletcher, who was older than he, and a friend, and they began to evangelize throughout the Gettysburg area there. And you have to remember that in those days, the countryside of Pennsylvania was still pretty much underdeveloped. There was lots of rural area around there in small towns. And they began to evangelize in these areas around there. At the same time, he was attending the only educational institution that was in the area, Hunterstown Academy, where he graduated with an exhorter's license. Now, the Methodist Church is known for having hollers, people that howled, who spoke out, at revivals, and enticing people to come forward and give witness to their conversions. And in those days, there were many institutions of higher learning that issued these licenses then for the evangelist, to give him a certain amount of, shall we say, authority. Well, it wasn't long before he became well known in the area around there. And he and his brother and his friend then began to reach out beyond the communities there to places that had no churches. And before you know it, there were 4 churches that were established through their ability to bring people to God. So Brother Van now understood exactly what he was called to do. God was calling him to minister. And suddenly he also had a vision that God wanted him to do more than just preach in the area around there. He had the opportunity early on to actually take over one of the churches that he had started. And they offered him the grand salary of $300 a year and board if he would stay with that church. And he gave it some serious thought, and then he decided, no, this is not where I'm supposed to be. God is calling me to another place. And so he turned down the offer, and it was about this time that he decided, that God was calling him west. He felt he needed to go someplace, and as he put it, to plant where nobody else had planted. So he decided he was going to leave his home area of Gettysburg and move west. Well, when he made this decision then, and he told his aunt about this, she was a little disappointed because she wanted him to stay there. And she wanted him to continue his education and to actually enter the seminary and become a minister. And Brother Van thought about this for some time because his aunt said, you need the credentials, you know, you need to be identified as a minister. And he gave it some thought, and then he said, you know, no, it's not for me. I need to go. I need to move west. So finally, after much discussion, he decided to start his journey west. Well, he was given a big fond farewell, and the community at large there had a huge gathering and gave him a going away present. They presented him with a carpet bag. They presented him with a Bible. They provided him a pair of mittens and some woolen socks to keep his feet warm on his cold Montana western journey, or I should say western journey at the time. So he started off from Gettysburg, and his next destination was Oil City, Pennsylvania, which was about 200 miles from Gettysburg. Now, Oil City was a rip-roaring oil boom town because the first oil in the United States was discovered in Pennsylvania, at Oiltown, Pennsylvania, in 1857. And so the town was like a gold strike town like Bannack. It was wild and woolly and full of a lot of people that had no idea at all about religion, especially not about God. It was open saloons and all the carryings on that he was about to experience later in his life. And when he got there, as he did in almost every place he arrived at on this journey westward. He arrived there with not a penny to his name, but with the idea that God would provide. And God did provide very quickly for him because he found a job as a pumper at one of the oil fields. Now, a pumper is a person that ran a stationary engine. And these engines had pumped the oil into storage tanks. And it was an easy job, but nevertheless, it was a job that was necessary because it was vital to make sure that all of the oil production, was being stored properly and all. And so a lot of people liked it because it was this so-called easy job working in the oil fields there, and it paid fairly well. And so he went to work almost immediately. And then he ran into a slight difficulty with his foreman because he said he would not work on Sundays. And the foreman kind of gave him one of those, really? And so he was afraid he was going to lose the job. And so Will said, I want to tell you, I will work 6 days a week, and I will guarantee that the production on my watch will be as good on 6 days as it would be on 7 days. And of course the foreman looked at him a little strange, but he said, well, we'll give it a try. We'll see what happens. And that's exactly what happened, because Will worked diligently for 6 days, and lo and behold, his production was the highest of any of the other pump stations in the area around there. So the foreman gave him Sundays off. And so on the first Sunday off, he went out in the countryside there and soon began to attract a crowd with his preaching. And it wasn't too long before he was developing a following. And just like in the Gettysburg area there, people were attracted to him. He was charismatic, and he was a person that just drew himself to the other people. The people knew that they were talking to a man who did not speak a false word at all. So during these excursions out into the countryside and encouraging people to the Word of God, he met another person there by the name of Tommy Rogers. Now Rogers was also a pumper, and he was one of the few people in the oil fields at that time that had the same inclinations that Will had towards God. Very pious person. And on the first Sunday that Will was there, he met him. It wasn't the most fortuitous meeting, though, of two people, but because Tommy, Brother Van came into the pump station and said, hello, how are things going? And there were lots of grifters and con men around there. And so Tommy expected him, to be a confidence man or some kind. So he was kind of cold to him and wasn't friendly in the least bit. And this kind of turned Will off at the time, but then he thought, I don't know what's going on here. But later, Tommy's brother said, you probably give the cold shoulder to the only other pious person in Oil City. So Tommy soon found out where Will was staying, went over and apologized, and the two of them then became a gospel team. And together they went out into the area there, and again, as in Gettysburg, they began to establish churches. By the end of a 2-month period, they had already established about 4 churches within the Oil City area there. And once again, he was given the opportunity then to take one of those churches over. And they promised him again that he could become the minister there, and they offered him the huge sum of $250 a year to stay there as their minister. And once again, Will had to make a decision about whether to take the bird in hand or to move on. And the call came to him once again. This was not the place that God wanted him. So he continued his journey on westward. And he ended up in Illinois and attended a revival in Chicago, of all places, where he met the chaplain Charles McCabe, Charles McCabe, and he was called the fighting chaplain. Charles McCabe was known for fundraising for the Methodist Church, and he gave presentations throughout the country on his experiences in Libby Prison during the Civil War, which was an infamous Confederate prisoner of war camp. And he met McCabe, and McCabe was impressed by his appearance and by his piousness. And so Will made known that he was unsure about what he should do now. He talked about his success in Gettysburg and in Oil City and all. And McCabe offered this advice to him. He says, I think that you should go west and plant where nobody else has planted. And so that was all that he needed. So he left Chicago, Illinois, and ended up in Sioux City, Iowa, on the banks of the Missouri River. And once again, entering town with no money and no idea of what he was going to do or how he was going to get any further than where he was at the present time. So he worked for the Reverend Kozer there, who was the minister in Sioux City, Iowa. And he helped him with the services and began to evangelize and work with people in the various small communities around Sioux City. And once again, obtained a following. And it wasn't too long then that Will began to realize that, as things were, he was being successful once again, that maybe this might be the place that God was calling him to. And once again, that nagging thing in the back of his mind, this is not exactly where I want to be. And so he decided finally, that he was going to have to move on. And so he went down to the riverfront, and he was looking at all of the ships that were bound for Montana territory. And it was a motley looking group of ships that were along the banks of the Missouri in Sioux City, Iowa at that time. But there was one that stood out. It was called the Far West. And it was the only one that really looked like a ship, because it was clean. It was everything. All of the stacks were shiny and bright and all. And he thought, this has to be the vessel I'm destined to board to go to Montana. So he decided that he would see what it would cost him to go to Montana Territory. Well, there was Captain Matt Carlson was the captain of the ship. And he approached the captain and tried to find out what the fare was. And the captain says, well, I've only got one. I only got one stateroom left. It's $100. And so he looked at the captain a little bit, you know, and then he had to admit he didn't have $100. The captain looked at him and said, well, okay, how about if I $75 and you can help me as a deckhand? And Wills kind of turned to him again and said, no. So he finally had to admit, when the price got down to $50, that the only thing he had in his pocket at the time was $5. And so he thought his chances of getting aboard was gone. So he left. Well, at the same time, there was a superintendent that came out from New York and was going through the territory there and found out about the good works that Brother Vanderbilt, and he wasn't Brother Van yet, by the way, that Will was doing in the area there. And so he, with the encouragement from the Reverend Kozer, decided to offer Will a position as a minister. And so he talked to Will, and, you know, being from New York, he was a little arrogant, to say the least, and all. And he didn't really convince Will much, but he offered Will $800 a year in salary to take over a church in Iowa there. And Will gave it some thought, and he thought that maybe he should take it simply because of the goodness that was shown to him through the local Methodist church in Sioux City. But again, he turned his back on it. He went back down to the river, and he met Captain Carlson again. And he said, I need to go west. I need to go to Montana Territory. And Captain Carlson, knowing his situation at the time, said, well, I'll tell you what. He says, if you come on board then, work as a deckhand, do the service on Sundays, and just make yourself useful, I'll take you to Montana Territory. And Will said that it's a deal. So he went back, got his carpet bag with his mittens and his socks and Bible, and came back, and he said, I will tell you right now, Captain, he says, because they had negotiated the fare down to $50 in his previous meeting, he says, I will guarantee you then that you will have $50 when you come back to Sioux City, Iowa, if you take me aboard then. And so Captain Carlson didn't think anything about it, you know, and let him come on board and let him work his passage to Montana Territory. So now he was on his way to where he thought he should be in the West, in Montana Territory. This was the place where he was going to sow where nobody else had sowed. They made the fastest trip ever on the Missouri River to Fort Benton, which was the dropping off place for Montana Territory and the riverboats. The riverboats could go no further than Fort Benton, which is over in the eastern part of the northeastern part of the state. And on the way, when the way through, he had some adventures there. There was some trouble with the Indians. And Sitting Bull and Red in the Face actually were in the area and were trying to board the vessel and trying to make trouble for the vessel at one time when the vessel was stopped to gather wood. And he also had the opportunity to meet Buffalo Bill, who was on a hunt in the area around there. So this was, you know, this was so exciting to this boy from Pennsylvania, and it just doubled his excitement for getting to Montana Territory. By the time he got to the Montana Territory at Fort Benton, It was June 30th. And 1872 is the date. June 30th, 1872. And it was pouring down rain. He spent the night on the far west, woke up and came off of the far west the next morning. The people on board there had gathered a collection for him. He gave it to him. And the first thing he did is he stepped off. He was going to find a place to preach for the day. Well, as I said, it had been pouring down rain. It was still raining a great deal. And all of a sudden, Will discovered what Montana gumbo was. Because the streets were just thick with Montana gumbo. And as he started to walk away from the landing there, he sunk almost knee deep in mud and everything, and had to try to get himself pulled out of all of the muck and everything. And it seems like, Montana was saying, "This is the place. You're here. We're keeping you." He had a devil of a time walking, but pretty soon he was looking for that place to preach his first sermon in Montana territory. Well, he met a priest who was about to go back to the United States. And so they started to converse, and the good father said, "Well, you might try the courthouse as a place to do your preaching. It's convenient, and it has a fair-sized space there for you." So he walked down to the courthouse, and it was not conducive to holding services, because Brother Ed stuck his head in and looked around, and the floor was nothing but gumbo. The roof was leaking like a sieve, and it was probably drier outside than inside. And so he decided he better start looking someplace else. He ran into a person by the name of T.C. Powers, who owned several businesses in Fort Benton at the time. And he pointed him to a saloon, the Four Deuces Saloon. He said, "You might try that place there, because it's got lots of space, and I think that maybe the owner would be conducive to you holding a service." Well, he was a little bit, little bit taken back about this, because he'd never been in a saloon before. But he decided, what have we got to lose? So he walked into the saloon, approached the bartender, and the bartender said, "Sure, be glad to shut down the saloon for an hour for you if you want." And so he had his place to preach. So he was satisfied, so he went back to the far west, cleaned up a bit, tried to polish up his boots as much as possible, and he went back to the saloon about 2 o'clock in the afternoon there, went into the saloon, and they had about a half a block long bar. The bartender was standing behind it, and he banged his fist down on the bar, and he said, "We're going to shut down the bar for an hour, and we're going to have a religious service here." And everybody kind of hooted and hollered and everything, and the bartender said, "Bar's closed." So Brother Van had his first gathering in Montana territory, in the Four Deuces Saloon. Well, as I said, he was a little taken aback by it, and so for a moment he hesitated. He wasn't really prepared for this, He had a message and he just couldn't spit it out. And then all of a sudden he started singing. Now, one of the things that you are going to learn about Brother Van is that he had a beautiful singing voice. And about almost always the first thing that anybody ever mentioned when they talked about Brother Van was his singing voice. And that was one of those special gifts that God gave to him that spoke to the people that he met. And so he started singing a popular hymn at the time, and it's got the attention of the audience there. And then somebody said, "Another song," and he sang again, another song, and another song. And then suddenly he had his voice, and he began to preach. Now, Brother Van was not the best preacher in the whole world. everybody seemed to admit that he was not the greatest preacher in the world. But at the same time, there was something about the way he said what he said. His message got out to people, no matter how unpolished it might be. And those beautiful songs, those beautiful hymns that came from his lips were things that just touched people's heart, because these people were without any kind of religious support any place in the territory at the time. And as an aside, I might tell you that one of the things, if you begin to study the history of Western towns, do you know what institution was the last to be built in any town? You always had a store. You always, if it was a mining town, you had an assay office. You had a general store of some kind. You always had a hotel. You always had a saloon. All of these were built. What was lacking? A church. A church. And so these people were without any kind of church, without anybody really leading, despite the fact, you know, that they had the Jesuits going through trying to convert the Indians. There were at that time 5 Methodist ministers in a territory as large as Montana. You know, there were 50 people avowed Methodists at the time in Montana territory, and only one finished church at that time in the territory. So he got his audience, and people were very, very enthused about this. So at the end of the service, somebody said, "Hey, preacher, who are you?" He said, "I'm William Wesley Van Orsdale." And somebody else said, "Well, that's a mouthful. I think we'll just call you Brother Van." Thus was born the name Brother Van. And he was Brother Van from then on throughout his life. So that evening, he held second service again in the Four Deuces. And this time the crowd was even larger, and it was even more successful. So after that service then, Mr. Powers came by and offered him a room to stay in for the evening. So he spent the evening there and stayed in Fort Benton through the 4th of July celebrations. And then he decided he was ready to move on. So he found a freight train that was a wagon train going towards Fort Shaw and down in the Sun River country, and he hitched a ride on this wagon train then. And they encountered, it was quite a journey. He left on the 6th of July, heading for the Sun River country. One of the problems was that despite an 18 oxen hitch, pulling a freight wagon got mired in the mud and everything, and the teamster was having a double of the time with his team trying to get through the mud and everything. And they finally got stuck for a while, and the teamster was a little bit perturbed. And he was trying to get the oxen to move, and he was using his whip and everything, and cussing up a blue streak and all. And Brother Dan was sitting next to him, you know. And pretty soon the teacher says, here's a stick. I want you to go down there, and I want you to poke the ribs of that oxen there on the left. Because he said, if you get him moving, we'll get the whole team moving. He said, you think you can do it? And Brother Dan said, yeah, sure. So he got off, waded over through the mud, over to the oxen there, hit that oxen with me, and the teacher was whipping away and I'm cussing, you know. And the minute that Brother Van hit that oxen just jumped and moved forward, and the whole team started forward. And Brother Van said, "Praise God!" And he got back up, and you know, and the teacher says, I'm sorry, Parson, but he says, for my language and all. But Brother Van said, well, I understand completely. He said, I felt your sentiments. I would have probably used other words, but nevertheless, we had the same effect. So the team moved on, and he got down to into the Fort Shaw area there. And he met another man by the name of Charles Bull. who was a leading citizen in the area around there. And Bull discovered that he was a minister, and so he asked if he would conduct a service there. First Methodist service in that area. And that evening, he gathered all their people from miles around came for the service. This was something that was going to happen time and time and time again during his stay in Montana. He would be the first person, Methodist or Protestant minister in areas that had never seen a preacher before. And it wasn't before too long, as he moved forward from there, the Blackfoot Reservation was in the area, and he visited the Blackfoot Reservation. It was there then that he was introduced to the native population. And he had an epiphany while he was there visiting the reservation. And something that changed his attitude about how to communicate with people other than who he had been communicating with. Because he at one time had said that he wanted a ministry to help civilize the native population. But he found out something very interesting, and this speaks to his personality. When he was introduced to the Indians there at the time, they were all very friendly, very outgoing, and through interpreters and sign languages and a few who could speak English, he began to talk to them, to question them about their way of life, their heritage, their beliefs and all. And he suddenly realized there was one old medicine man who spoke English, and Brother Van talked to him about Christ, about Jesus, about salvation, and about God's creation of the earth, the Old Testament story. And then the medicine man started talking about how the Blackfeet believed the earth was created. Okay. An old man creating it and creating human beings, the whole life cycle. And suddenly, Brother Van realized that he was telling the story of the Old Testament, the story of creation, only just a little bit different way. And then he suddenly, had this epiphany that really, it's the same God. And that's what he told. That's what he told the medicine man. Yes, because the medicine man had asked him, is this the same God? It was. It was. And so from that time forward, he began to understand just exactly what it meant to minister to the native population. Because he had later an experience where it all came to the forefront, because he was at another reservation there, and he was trying the old way the old sermon way of trying to reach his audience, and he wasn't having much success. They were all sitting there silently, just as if they weren't paying any attention to him. And all of a sudden, his audience left. And he looked around and he was, what's going on here? And what was happening was that somebody had come in and said that the Crow Indians, because this was the Blackfoot, the Crows had come in and sold the horse herd of the tribe. And so the young people had left and were going to try to recover their horses. But he was not privy to this information at the time. He thought it was something that he had said. And so, anyway, as they were going out, one of the interpreter explained to him what was happening. So Brother Van said, you can have my horse. And so they took his horse and off they ran. And they were gone for about an hour and a half, something like that, 2 hours, and they came back, and they all came back in again. And they wanted him to resume his talk. And he began to realize that, at that time, yes, you just can't reach these people, because even though they were respectful enough not to interrupt or anything, they didn't quite understand what he was getting to. And from that time on, he had the great heart for all Native Americans, and the Blackfoot especially, and they called him the Great Heart. And when he finally passed, one of the elders said, "At least now we have somebody in heaven who will talk for us." So he had won the affection of the Blackfeet people. The other thing that came out of this visit to the Blackfeet Reservation was a buffalo hunt, and they invited him on a buffalo hunt. Now, if you can imagine a person coming from the east, in Pennsylvania, never really encountering a buffalo before, but given the honor of going on a buffalo hunt. And so he did. He was not a really good rider, but he was a fair rider at the time. They put him on his horse, they rode out, they found the herd, and he actually shot a buffalo and killed the buffalo. I think that cemented his relationship with the Blackfeet people. And Charlie Russell then painted, in later life, painted a picture of Brother Van's buffalo hunt. And copies of it were hung in every bar in territory of Montana, I think. I'm not sure where the picture is today, but it's someplace in Great Falls, I believe. But anyway, so onward the journey. Onward the journey. So he ended up on another freighter's wagon traveling towards Helena, where the Methodist Church had its center at the time. And once again, he enters an area and introduced to a minister with absolutely no money to his name, and the presiding elder there, J.A. Van Anda, who was an early pioneer minister here in Montana, had no idea who he was. Nobody had said anything about sending a missionary or anybody like Brother Van to him. Here was this young man just there and saying, "I'm here to help you to serve the Lord." And so he didn't know what to do with it. So Brother Van made himself useful once again, and then Van Andis decided that he was sincere and that he would be useful. So he sent him out as a roving missionary for 1 year. Because, see, at this time, Van Anda had no idea about his credentials, his training, anything about him at all. So for 1 year, that was what Brother Van done. 1872, then he roamed the whole area of Montana Territory, from east to west, visiting any hamlet, any cabin, any place that there were people. You would find Brother Van at least once. By the end of the year, he came back to Helena and earned $75, traveled over 2,000 miles between horseback and his Shanks ponies. And thus, he was established here in Montana Territory. Now, by this time, he had a horse given to him. The horse's name was Jonathan. And Jonathan and Brother Van became the heavenly team. Jonathan was a beautiful, strong-boned animal. He was with him for pretty close to 20 years. So, in 1873 then, having proved his worth, and because the conference now, the Methodist General Conference had established a conference here in Montana. It was the Rocky Mountain Conference. And so now he was a junior, settled with a junior, as a junior pastor to the presiding, or more educated pastor by the name of Francis Reagan. And they became partners in riding the circuit in this part of the country. Now, Brother Van had a friendship with two of the most powerful Methodist preachers in the state of Montana, actually in Methodism, in Western Methodism. One was Francis Reagan, the other was Thomas Hyland. And he formed a friendship with both of them that ran long and deep. They were lifelong friends, lifelong companions on the circuit riding trail. Thomas Iliff was educated. He was a crusader and was responsible for establishing churches. The first church in Bozeman, the first church in Missoula. And he was also known as a lecturer and a crusader for human rights. He was a man ahead of his time. Francis Reagan was formally trained and was a Bible scholar. And so it was a perfect match when they matched him with Brother Van, because then Brother Reagan would preach and Brother Van would sing, and it was a perfect gospel team. And that's what they did for a year, serving this whole area around here. By the time of the first annual conference in Salt Lake City, and Brother Van and Francis Reagan then were well known in this area, and served an area that was 200 miles from east to west, 50 miles north to south. And when they started, there was only one half-built church and 50 scholars, 50 Methodists. By the time they finished up, there was a full-time church, and there were over 150 people that had professed their faith in their mission work in 1 year's time. So you think from Salmon, Idaho, all the way over to Virginia City was the breadth of their secret writing. So by the end of that first year, then by the end of the second year, Brother Van was well established here in Montana. So at that time, then he became. I have to always refer to him. He became the missionary at large, and the Bitterroot Valley was his main territory for his circuit then. And he said before they had a general conference in Salt Lake City, and at that time there were now 7 Methodist ministers here in Montana. And so Brother Van didn't have enough money to afford to go to the general conference there. The governor of the territory, Governor Potts, knew Brother Van quite well, and he gave him the $100 necessary for him to go to the conference in Salt Lake. And his stagecoach drivers, they took the stage down to Salt Lake, and they said it was the best trip that they had ever had in their lives. They had 7 Methodist ministers there singing hymns from the time they got on the coach to the time they went to sleep at night until they got to Salt Lake City. They said it was the greatest experience they ever had. And in Salt Lake City, then Thomas Iliff was there, of course, and Brother Van, and they were walking the streets of Salt Lake and taking in the sights and everything, and they saw the tabernacle. And so they decided they would go in and take a look at the tabernacle. They walked into the tabernacle there, and they were just taken with all of the ornate fixings and things of the cathedral. And they lost all track of time. And when they decided it was time to go, they found themselves, all by themselves, locked in. There was a big iron fence around the whole area there, and they couldn't get out. And they didn't know what they were going to do. And the night was falling, and they were there behind the gate. Well, finally, Thomas Iliff said, "Well, Brother Van, I think the only thing we can do then is scale the fence." And so they climbed over this iron fence, if you could imagine, two ministers dressed somewhat similar to what I'm like, and over the fence, and that's how they got out of the tabernacle that night. As they were walking back into their lodging, they happened to see this gentleman walking down the street, and Thomas Iliff poked Brother Van, and he said, "I think that's Brigham Young." And Brother Van looked at him and he says, well, I think maybe you're right. And he says, I said, I dare you to go over and speak to him, you know. Wow. He couldn't wait so Brother Van accepted the challenge and went over and introduced himself and Dr. Ryloff, you know, and Brother Van said, well, glad to meet you, yes. You know, I was a Methodist too one time. And that really took Brother Van kind of aback, you know, which reminds me of a couple of stories about Methodists. This story has a couple of versions. The version that I like, and it's probably closer to the truth than any of the versions, was that Brother Van was traveling on the stagecoach through Yellowstone. And the stage was stopped by robbers, and the robbers got all the passengers out and started taking their possessions and everything. And they came down to Brother Van, and Brother Van said, you wouldn't rob a poor Methodist minister, would you? And the robber said, no, I'm a Methodist too. And left him keep his there was another version I heard, though, that said that the robber said, I was a Methodist minister once myself. You can keep your valuables. I don't know which was true, but I know it was true. But nevertheless, that was how Methodists were at the time. You could find Methodists just about any place, you know, under any circumstance. So anyway, Brother Van and Thomas and Francis Reagan went to Yellowstone. They were probably, this is back in 1873, and they were spending the night there, and they were in the lower Bison Basin, and they had set up camp there, and they went to sleep, and then all of a sudden, one of the geysers just exploded, and just soaked into the skin and everything, and they hopped up, you know, and they were grabbing all of their gear and everything, trying to get away from the geyser there, and they grabbed this blanket, and Brother Van was pulling on the blanket, you know, and it wouldn't budge, it must have been stuck on something. Brother Reagan was pulling on something, you know, and they wouldn't give, and all of a sudden they both turned to each other, you know, and they had hold of the same blanket, and they were pulling in opposite directions. And Brother Reagan said, well, at least that shows you the value of cooperation. So there was always something good to come out of a bad situation. The two of them had many adventures over time, and to show you what kind of relationship that they had with the area around here. On one of their rides, over here near the pass, coming into the Grasshopper Valley, there was a house there that was noted for boarding people as they rode through the area. And on this particular journey, Brother Van and Brother Reagan stopped at the house there and asked the owner of the place if they could have room and board for the night. And the gentleman said, yes, sure, no problem at all. And so the next morning, after being fed and taking care of their animals and everything, they said, well, how much do we owe you? And the owner looked at him, and he looked at him again, and he says, well, in this country here, there's only two kinds of people that wear billed shirts, boiled shirts. He said they're either gamblers or they're ministers. He says, which are you? He says, now if you're a gambler, it's going to cost you $2 a piece, and if you're a minister, I'll take it out and preach it. And so Brother Reagan said, well, we're preachers. So the owner of the house went in, got his Bible, came back out, and Brother Reagan opened the Bible then and started preaching from the passage that he opened to. And then Brother Van started singing. So he says, yeah, I know you're preachers then. So they got free room and board. And every time that they passed through that area there, They stayed there, and they always got free room and board. And the other story about Brother Riggin that I really love telling is the one about Brother Riggin was from back east. This is highly educated when he came out here. And he learned very quickly that if you're coming out here and you're going to be met on equal terms with the other people out here, you better adapt to the area here. And that included how you dress. He got off of the train, and of course he had an Eastern outfit on, high hat and all. And he was made fun of at the railroad station. And pretty soon he lost his hat because some cowboys there were jumping around with him and got his hat off of him and threw it up in the air and shot full of holes and everything. So the very next day, he went to a clothing store and changed his outfit. So he fit in with the environment out here. And he was a fairly decent rider too. So traveling between 2,000 and 4,000 miles, all the time, he had to be a good rider. And one day he got a little careless when he saddled his horse. And as they rode off, the rabbit or something scared his horse, and the horse started to buck, and had not shifted the saddle tight enough, and the saddle kind of rolled like this, and as it rolled, it threw him off, and he ended up on the ground. And Brother Van was standing was on the horse right beside him, and he said, "Well, Francis, it looks like your horse has lost its rigging." So when Brother Van then started into this area here as a roving missionary in 1874, he met a young lady by the name of Jeannie Johnston. Now he had his first encounter with Jeannie in a very unusual way, because he was about to go to a meeting in the Horse Prairie area there, and it was pouring down rain, and so he was just soaked to his skin, and he couldn't find the meeting house, and so consequently he decided he was going to try and find shelter someplace else. And as he was riding along, he saw a light from a ranch house, and he stopped at the ranch house. And he knocked on the door, and this young girl came to the door. She had a pistol in her hand, and she opened the door, and the pistol was right at his chest, And he said, "Can I come in?" And she looked at him, and he must have looked halfway decent anyway. It didn't scare her all that much. But anyway, she said, "Come on in." But she never lowered the pistol or anything like that. And she said, "You can go over by the fire and dry off if you like," and which he did. And then all the time she was holding the pistol. And so Brother Van was kind of taken back a little bit by this, but he began to talk to her and try to put her at ease and everything. And finally she let him know that she was all by herself, but her parents were at a meeting, the meeting that he was supposed to be at. It was a church meeting. And she said, and they're expecting Brother Van. And Brother Van was bound to be there because he never misses a meeting. And, he was kind of chagrined about hearing this, because he thought nobody would ever go to a meeting in this kind of rainstorm and everything. So he quickly put back on his coat and the garments that were semi-dry and left the house, and with directions from her as to where the meeting was going to be, and rode off. And of course he got to the meeting, and he made no mention at all of his experience. And they held the meeting that evening, and they held service and sang hymns and all till like midnight. And then this family invited him to the ranch, the very place that he had left earlier. And when they came in the door, there was nobody any more surprised than the young lady that saw him earlier. But he never said a thing to the mother or the father. And so it was the following morning that he finally confessed about the experience the night before. This was Jimmy Johnson, his his one true love. There was something about her that he just said something special about her. And as she grew older, they developed more than a friendship. And by the time that she was 16, they were pretty much committed to each other, because it seemed like every time he was in the Beaverhead Valley, he always stopped at this ranch, always. And which was rather unusual for Brother Ann. And so eventually they decided that they were going to become engaged, which they did. Now, Van was considerably older, about 10 years older than she. But this was not unusual at the time, because by the time you're 16, you're married at triple age, you know. But the parents were a little skeptic of her marrying somebody that was kind of beneath their station in life at this point in time, because they were successful ranchers, and they didn't see much of a future for their daughter with this circuit riding preacher. You know, they didn't have much of anything to call to be able to support her wife and all. But they reluctantly agreed to the engagement, but they wanted their daughter to go to college and at least be able to get an education, which might help her in life. So Brother Ann had agreed to this situation, and they sent her to Northwestern College in Illinois. And she became very, very ill, and eventually came back home. She had tuberculosis, they believe, but whatever it was, it killed her. She died at 18, and Brother Van lost the only woman that he really truly ever loved. He never again had any kind of romantic relationships with anybody at that time. And in some ways, you know, people later said that maybe God was telling him something, because he never could have done what he did in life if he had been married, probably. Because he would have probably had to settle down. He couldn't have had this roaming type of life, you know, if he had been married and be as successful as he was later because of this. So. But there is a little rest of the story that I'll get to in a couple of minutes there. So, the story of Brother Van is this. The captain of the Far West asked him when he was coming west, he said, you know, why are you going to Montana? Of all places, why are you going to Montana? And Brother Van answered, to sing, to preach, and to encourage people to be good. That was his philosophy. And that was his philosophy of life. That was the philosophy of his ministry. And that was the philosophy that he lived by for the rest of his life. There's lots and lots of stories, Brother Van's stories. I brought along this here. It's Brother Van, by those who knew him. Well, I think it was you that put me white to this. And it is reminiscences of people who knew Brother Van in their lifetime. And they talk about the memories of Brother Van. And it's an excellent book. I don't know, is it still available, do you know?
You what now?
Is it still available?
I would doubt it.
Yeah. But anyway, one thing that comes through in this book here, and almost everybody's heard of this, is how special Brother Van's presence was in their presence. One man said, you know, it was like sunshine being shining in through the window. He said there was nobody that could make you feel better by his mere presence. He was that type of charismatic person. It was said that Brother Van met everybody on their own terms. He never met anybody that he looked down to. That's what made him both so very, very popular, but also so very, very effective too in his ministry. If he was with a bunch of hooligans, and and they would give him a rough time or something like that. It didn't bother him at all. And they said, come on into the saloon and have a drink. He went into the saloon with them, and he would have a drink of water or orange soda. Orange soda was his drink of choice in the saloons. Although many times they didn't have the orange soda, so he always ordered water. And this was the thing that made the difference. But when Brother Van, though, wanted to meet you, though, he met you on his terms. He wanted people to know what he stood for. And he was a Methodist who did not believe in drinking, did not believe in dancing, did not believe in gambling. So the very antithesis of everything that, the element that he was appealing to, but he made it. So they understood where he was coming from.
It's ghosts.
He understood where they were coming, where he was coming from. He understood where they were coming from, and it was all he emphasized, I think, in a letter written by Charlie Russell. I know most of you know who Charlie Russell was. He was Charlie Russell was a famous painter, and Montana's a Montanan from a Montana cowboy who gained international fame for his artwork. Brother Van was celebrating his 70th birthday in Fort Benton, March 20th of 1918. And the whole state was invited to the party. I mean, it was unbelievable. Dignitaries from all over the state came for the birthday party. Of course, Charlie was invited. But he said, he wrote this letter to Brother Van. He said, Dear Brother Van, I received an invitation to your birthday party from the Reverend Bunch, and I'm more than sorry that I can't be there because I'm on jury. But he says, I think it was about the time, this time of year, about 30-some years ago, that we first met at Babcock's Ranch in Pig Eye Basin on the Upper Judith. I was living at the time with a hunter and trapper, Jake Hoover, who you will remember. He and I had come down from the South Fork with 3 pack horses loaded with deer and elk meat, which he sold to the ranchers, and we had stopped for the night with old Bob, a man as rough as the mountains he loved, but was all heart from his belt up. And friends or strangers were welcome to shove their feet under his table. This all welcome way of his made the camp a hangout for many mountain and prairie men, and his log wall and dirt roof seemed like a palace to those who lived mostly under the sky. The morning you came there was a mixture of bullwhackers and hunters and prospectors who welcomed you with strong handshakes and rough but friendly greetings. I was the only stranger to you, so after Bob introduced Kid Russell, he took me to one side and he whispered, Bob says to me, I don't sound for many damn singers, palm singers, but Brother Van deals square. When we all sat down to our own elk meat, beans, coffee, and dried apples under the rays of the bacon, greased light, these men who knew little of law, and one among them I know, wore notches on his gun, men who had not prayed since they had knelt at their mother's knee, bowed their heads, while you, Brother Van, gave thanks, and when you finished, someone said, Amen. Now, I'm not sure, but I think it was a man who I heard later was or had been a road agent. I was 16 years old then, Brother Van, but I've never forgotten your stay at Old Bob's, with men who talked was generally emphasized with fancy profanity, but while you were with us, although they had to talk very, very slow and careful, there was never a slip. The outlaw at Bob's was a sinner, and none of us there were saints, but our hearts were clean, at least while you gave thanks. When the holdup said, Amen, you brought to the minds of those hardened homeless men The faces of their mothers and few can be bad while few can be bad while she is near. Now I've mentioned many times since thank you, Brother Van, sometimes in lonely places, but you were never lonesome or alone, for a man with scarred hands and feet stood beside you, and near him there was no hate. So all who met you loved you. It has been said that if you're good, you'll be happy. And many contradict and say that goodness is a rough trail over dangerous passes, with windfalls and swift, deep rivers to cross. Now, I've never ridden it very far myself, but judging from the look of you, it's a cinch bet that with a horse called Faith under you, it's a smooth, flower-grown trail with easy fords where birds sing and cold, clear streams dance in the sunlight, all the way to the pass that crosses the big divide. Brother Van, you have ridden that trail a long time, and I hope you still ride it to many birthdays on this side of the big range. Your best wishes from my best half to me, your friend, C.M. Russell. That there was Brother Van in a nutshell, by somebody who knew him so very, very well. Now, I have to tell you that there are lots and lots of stories about Brother Van in his sense of humor and all. He was like all Methodist ministers, like all ministers in general. He loved chicken. And of course, when he traveled all the time, he was at the mercy, of people that he had stayed with. And everybody knew that when Brother Van was around, you had to have dinner for Brother Van. And so, one time he was at a ranch, and he was sitting in the kitchen there, having a cup of coffee. And the chickens were making a fuss outside of the door, and so somebody came in through the kitchen door, and one of the chickens got into the kitchen, and it started running all over the place, up to the ceiling, and down on the table, and around, and the wife was chasing the chicken, trying to get it out of the door, and all of a sudden it went into the oven of the stove there. Brother Van turned and saw what was happening. He said, I've never seen a chicken that was so eager to get into the ministry. And Brother Van had terrible table manners. He never had a home. He never had a house he could call his home. He was always at the mercy of other people's generosity. When he traveled, they said that there wasn't a house in the state of Montana, a house, a cabin, even the lowest of homes, that did not have a Brother Van space. And he was welcome any place that he went. If Brother Van was in the area, it was an honor to be able to house him. And so he never really had the table manners of I hate to say civilized person. So consequently, we had to be a little cautious when you fed Brother Van. He was so full of energy and everything that if you set him on the outside of the table there, he would consume his food so quickly and up from the table that everybody else would have to leave the table, So you got into the habit of trying to put him into a corner and surrounding him, with other people, so it would be difficult for him to get out, so that at least everybody else could finish your meal. And of course, in many cases too, he was boarding with people that were living in dugouts and things like that. So the food was less than, shall we say, safe to eat sometimes, So he always took care of that problem too, because he never wanted to insult anybody, So he always said to his hostess that if the environment was a little less than clean, I like my potatoes boiled with their skins on, and I like my eggs hard boiled. So he was always cautious about that. And later in life, like most ministers, you know, you get tired of having chicken every time you serve dinner and everything, so he had a love for roast beef. So he was always hinting that it was all right to feed him roast beef rather than chicken, you know. But more often than not, he ended up eating chicken. It was also said that people that had children, that they did not like to have serve Brother Van soup when the children were sitting around the table, because he slurped. And they said that when they served soup, then for weeks afterwards, they had to break their children of slurping their soup, because if Brother Van did it, it's all right. So. The other one of my other favorite Brother Van stories, and I will. What time is it anyway?
3:12.
Dinner time.
Dinner time.
10 after 3.
Oh, okay. I'll stop there in a minute. One of my other favorite Brother Van stories. Sometime, I don't know, it wasn't a year or so after he'd been in the territory here. He had been in Bozeman, and he hitched a ride with a local rancher to his ranch. And he wanted to go to Raidersburg, which was a small town that was, at that time, had a gold strike of some kind, and it was prospering. And Raidersburg, for anybody that doesn't know, is over near Townsend. And he wanted to go over and see the town. So the rancher, he stopped at the rancher's house there and got off in his horse. Of course, he didn't have the horse, so he was going to have to use his chance spoons to get to Raidersburg. So he decided that he'd leave his preaching outfit there at the ranch and pick it up when he came back from Raidersburg. So he dressed in just kind of common, like here, you know, farmer's clothes, kind of ranching clothes. And he started off walking to Raidersburg. And so by the time he got to the edge of Raidersburg, you know, he was a little disheveled. You know, the hat was all dusty and everything. His clothes were dusty, and they were well worn and everything. And as he entered town, he began to notice as he was walking down the street that he wasn't getting a very friendly welcome. And he was a little concerned about this, you know. And the further he walked around the town there, the more the people were gathering behind him, and he was getting these ugly looks from people on the sidewalks. And then all of a sudden he saw this reward poster there, and a horse thief, $100 reward. And he noticed a slight resemblance of himself to the picture on the woman poster. And began to get a kind of a funny feeling that maybe people were mistaking him for that man that was wanted, the horse thief. And as he continued to walk and the crowd got bigger and they got a little bit uglier and everything, he was really getting worried now. And so he saw this wagon and he jumped up on the wagon and he started to sing. And so he sang a song and pretty soon the wagon was surrounded by people. And the singing wasn't having any effect on the crowd. They were looking at him like they were getting ready to hang. And he looked over to the nearby tree, and they'd already thrown a rope around the tree there. And so he sang another song, and he said, "Hey, I'm a Methodist pastor. I'm a Methodist minister." And somebody from the crowd said, "Well, even Methodist ministers can be horse thieves." And later on, he said, "That must have been a Presbyterian." But anyway, it didn't seem to have much of an effect. And this guy says, there was a guy from the audience that said, "Well, I know Brother Van, and you don't look like Brother Van." And then he started singing. He started singing one of his all-time favorite hymns, which was "A Diamond in the Rough." And this is a song that always brought people to their feet and change them. Someplace in here, I'm going to find it here. Anybody listen to that?
It's in the back there.
You're not going to sing.
Oh, here it is, yeah.
No.
Well, walking out one evening, not knowing where to go, and just to pass the lone hours before we held the show, the Bethel Mission band passed, all singing with their might. I gave my heart to Jesus and left the show that night. The day will soon be over when digging will be done, and no more gems to be gathered, so let us all press on. When Jesus comes to claim us and says it is enough, the diamonds will be shining, no longer in the rough. There's 4 verses. But this song always hit a chord with the roughest of crowds. And it was written by a circus clown, believe it or not, and in the 1870s, and about the life that he led on the road, which was far from being fun and everything. And he started singing that, and the crowd then began to realize that who it was that was singing. And so he was saved from the noose. And later on, he often liked to tell the story that he did save the life of a person by his singing. And everybody would ask, well, who was that? And he said, me! So, in 1919, he was nearing 70 years old. And he was tiring, and yet he had not officially retired. He was still supervising many churches over in the Highline area. And he was over there visiting several churches and Choto and in the Highline area there. And he had a stroke. And he had a series of strokes, about 3 strokes, and eventually he was incapacitated, and then finally moved to Helena, to the hospital there. And on December 19th, 1919, he passed away. He was buried in Helena, Montana, at the Mountain Vale, and yeah, cemetery. There's a big, his stone is a big boulder, bronze plaque on it saying, Brother Van, pioneer, circuit riding preacher. That was his legacy to the state here. Brother Van's legacy can be told in many ways. One, by all of the churches that he helped build. He's responsible for the creation of over 100 churches here in the state of Montana and over 50 parsonages. He was responsible for the creation of the Intermountain Children's Home. He was responsible for getting started the Deaconess Church, Deaconess hospitals here in the state. He is responsible for pioneering university here that eventually became Rocky Mountain College in Billings. That is one of his biggest legacies. The fact that he brought God to anybody that he was with. That is his legacy. And I don't know, it is beyond comprehension how one man could have the kind of influence he did and change so many lives and transformed the people to the point where they became, the very symbols of what it means to be a follower of Christ. As I say, it's beyond even my humble attempts trying to impress upon you just how special this man was. How you can meet him and in an instant be transformed. It's it's beyond, I think, anybody's imagination. To say that he was one of the greatest of the Montanans is an understatement, because he was. He really was. And the fact that we are sitting here in this building and listening partially to his story now is a testament to how great he really was. This church here is the living testament to what this town became, because this church was built after the Battle of the Big Hole. Through his efforts to get done, he had the foundation was laid, and nothing else was happening. So after the dangerous pass with the Big Hole battle down here, he got the people together, and they built this. Within a couple of weeks, the church was built and dedicated and open for services. He had that kind of energy, that kind of faith in not only the Lord, but that kind of faith in the people too, to do what was right. That's Brother Van. I mean, he was a legend in his own time, and I'm just sorry that more people are not aware of just how important he was to the history of the state of Montana. Because it was said at his funeral, there wasn't anybody in the state of Montana that did not know who Brother Van was. So, I hope you enjoyed. I have lots more stories, but, you know. Thank you for your patience. And you're all invited back to the on Bannack Days, because we the Methodist Church in town has the services on Bannack Sunday. And we have two services, one at 9 o'clock, one at 10:30, and you are all welcome to come to the service, okay? So, see you on Bannack Days. Maybe I'll see you here at the church. Okay? And just one little tidbit about this church, too. This is the only permanent church in Bannack, the only permanent church. Didn't mean they didn't have church services here, though. In Bannack, there was, in the beginning of 1862 or 63, there was a building up on the far end of the town called the Roundhouse. And it had nothing to do with the railroad, it just was an eight-sided building up there. And it was a kind of a multi-purpose kind of building. And they held church services in this building for several years. But this is the only permanent church that was ever here, and it was only an active church until a little bit after the turn of the century. Then it became it served as a schoolhouse, although they still held services here, but it was a schoolhouse at the same time. And that is not the parsonage necessarily, because I never had a parsonage. And one last thing I have to tell you about Brother Van, you know, and most people make a mistake about this, because there's lots of people like me that like to talk about old-time religion and revivals and that kind of thing. Brother Van was never a hellfire and brimstone type of preacher. Never. Because heaven was too special. You don't want to frighten people. You want to encourage people. You want to find the joy in your faith. And that's what he did. That was a major difference from so many other writing preachers. He believed in the joy of faith, the joy of knowing God, the joy of knowing Jesus. And so you never heard hell and damnation sermons from him. Never, ever. It was always about the joy of knowing Christ. That's what made him so very, very special. So if you're ever in a church like this and you hear these hell and damnation kinds of sermons, you know, you didn't get very many of those from Western Circuit writing preachers. No way. Got them in the East, but you never got them out here. Okay.
Sing us a song.
Oh, over and over